So good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to one more session of CoHaB Indian Diaspora Center's webinars. This, you might know, is our 10th webinar after the lockdown started. Actually, the lockdown started in Mumbai in India around the middle of March last year. So it's a year now since we have been in some kind or the other of a lockdown. And in the first few months, we were in a very, very strict lockdown. No public transport was working. Private cars were not allowed on the road. There was just nothing. Shops were closed, and even getting vegetables and provisions was extremely difficult. So doing anything, any programming for CoHaB was almost out of the question. But by June, there was a little bit of easing up. And by July, we thought that we should be doing something online, and the online platforms really started coming into their own. The university set up its own Zoom platform and Google Meet platforms and all kinds of platforms for even teaching online. So with the support and help and the courage that Kirti gave me, we started our online webcasts and webinars. And of course, Klaus was with us all the way today. I think he has said he will try to join us. So we started with our new series actually during the lockdown, the Law, Literature and Diaspora series. And we have had quite a lot of success with that series. And it is an interdisciplinary series. So we had the university's law department joining us for that series. And we have had about 5 lectures in that series, which have gone very well. And of course, our regular CoHaB IDC lecture series like this one today have gone on as well. We have also done outreach lectures for colleges colleges which are located outside the city, because the University of Mumbai, you might know, has a jurisdiction which extends all the way almost to Goa down the coast. And before independence, of course, it extended all the way to Karachi, independence and partition. So the Bombay University, which is what it was called then, had and still has a fairly wide-ranging jurisdiction. So our colleges, our Mofussil colleges, as we call them, the ones in the rural areas and semi-rural areas, they have been having a lot of problem finding resource persons and people to actually do the online teaching for them. And of course, internet connections are a problem all around the country, and gadgets on which to for students to reach out and teachers to reach out to the students is also very difficult. So we did a couple of outreach programs as well from CoHaB, which was purely in the area of canonical literature teaching, because this was for the English honors students. So we have done that. And today is our first talk in our Creative Writers series. So we are very happy to have 3 writers with us from different parts of the world. I welcome all of them. They are all old friends. Chandanilokuge from Australia, Kevin Ireland from New Zealand, and Rebecca Huck from Dhaka. Kevin and Chandani I have known for a very, very long time, and also had the good fortune of meeting them in person several times. Rebecca, somehow we have been meaning to have Rebecca over for so many years, but something or the other has intervened. And then finally it was a pandemic that intervened. So we are meeting virtually for the first time, but we feel that we have known Rebecca as well for a long time now. So a very hearty welcome to all of you on this platform. We are looking forward to hearing from you on diasporic writing, on sojourner writing, and we are very happy to have one diasporic writer, Chandanilokuge, and Kevin, who's actually going to speak on the distinction between the diaspora and the diasporic and the sojourner. And Rebecca, who has lived in different parts of the world and has written from there also as a sojourner. Maybe she thinks of herself as a diasporic, we don't know. We will be listening to them, and we hope that they will also be reading out a little from their creative writing. They'll have 30 minutes each, and we could start the program now. And for the chair, we are fortunate to have Professor Sridhar Rajeswaran as the chair. And Sridhar is an academic and also a creative writer himself. He's a published poet, and he's also a dramatist. His plays have been read over the All India radio stations in India. There have been dramatic readings of his plays at professional theaters in Mumbai. And as a poet, he has been published around the world, including in Janet's journal, I think, as well as in Vasafiri, both of which come out from the UK. He has been a poet in residence at the University of Düsseldorf in Germany, and his poems have there been translated into German, and they are available on the university's website. And he has been invited to various book fairs, the London Book Fair, the book fairs which take place in India, to read out his poems. So we are very happy that for our creative writing webinar, we have as the chair another creative writer. So with this, I hand over the platform to Sridhar Rajeswaran and request him to carry on with the proceedings.
Thank you, Professor Nilufer. And as regards my publication with Janet's magazine, I think I twisted her arm actually, otherwise I wouldn't have found a place, because it was one of my initial attempts which she had done a couple of decades ago. And it's a privilege to be here. And it's an honor to chair a session with so many illustrious writers. The audience is few, but as Matthew Arnold would say, select. And I would like to introduce Dr. Chandanilokuge. I had met Chandanilokuge at least 2 or 3 times, if my memory is right. But I also heard about her being spoken in the corridors of academia, places like Cologne and other places by people like Beata Neumeier and others. That was much before I happened to meet Chandani in the first place, because I used to regularly go there and teach in Cologne University also. Dr. Chandanilokuge, a former Australian Commonwealth scholar from Sri Lanka. Chandanilokuge is currently affiliated to the Australian National University, Canberra, as Associate Professor in Creative Writing and Literary Studies. Prior to this, she was at Monash University, Melbourne. During her tenure at Monash, 2001 to 2020, she founded and directed the Center for Postcolonial Writing and the South Asian International Researchers Network. The Monash MA and PhD creative writing degrees were established under her directorship. Her international appointments include a writing residency. I think I'm now going to murder the names. Chateau Lavigny, Switzerland, the Ludwig Hirschfeld Mack Visiting Chair in Australian Studies, Free University Berlin, La Studium International Research Chair in Creative Writing, Advanced Studies Institute France, and guest professorships at the Goethe University, Frankfurt, and Harvard University's Humanities Center. She is the recipient of a writer's grant from the Australia Council for the Arts and Research Grants from Australia India Council, Meyer and Ian Potter Foundations, and Arts Victoria. Chandani's research specializations include creative and critical approaches to the post-colonial, particularly in representations of transculturality in travel and tourism, migration, and diaspora. Her 16-book publications include 4 literary novels and a book of short stories. The sequel to her most recent novel, My Van Gogh, 2019, is expected to be published in 2021. Her novel, Softly As I Leave You, was awarded Sri Lanka's Good Against National Literary Award, and If the Moon Smiled was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier Award. Chandani is a regularly invited participant at Australian Writers' Festivals, and notably at the 2006 Kolkata Book Fair that showcased Australian literature and film. Her academic books include Creative Lives, Interviews with South Asian Diaspora Writers, edited with Chris Ringrose, World Literature Series, Columbia University Press, and is forthcoming in 2021, and Mediating Literary Borders, Asian Australian Writing, Rootley 2018, edited with Professor Janet Wilson. As editor of Oxford Classics Reissue Series, she has published 7 critical editions of pioneering Indian women's writing in English, including Life and Letters of Toruda, 2008, with the second edition coming out in 2011, and India Calling, Memories of Cornelia Sorabji, India's first woman barrister, 2003. Chandani's creative work has been translated into Greek, French, and Hindi. Her short fiction and academic essays are widely anthologized, including in Interventions, Journal of Postcolonial Studies, Journal of Postcolonial Writing, and the Australian Literary Journal, Mianjin. On that note, the floor is yours, Madam.
It was very long.
And the title of our talk today is The Isolated Creative Space in Diaspora. And I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Thank you very much, Sridhar, for that very long introduction. I was hoping you'd edit it a bit, but that's okay. So just for the record as well, good afternoon, everyone. It's late evening here in Melbourne. Nilufer, thank you for your invitation to this panel, and Sridhar for chairing it. It is a pleasure to be here among friends. So I will begin with an extract from my latest novel, My Van Gogh, that was published in Australia in 2019, as Sridhar said, and in Sri Lanka in 2020. The novel is all about belonging and disbelonging and the giddy line between. Very briefly, the novel's Australian-French protagonist, I think most of you may not have got it as yet. So the novel's Australian-French protagonist, Shannon, has dropped out of university due to depression and anxiety. He tries nomadic travel in France in an elusive quest for recovery from soul loss. His father is Australian, a farmer in outback Victoria. For reasons unknown, his French mother has left the family when Shannon was a little boy. Hence, his impulsive decision to meander across France, where his brother permanently resides. Here he is now adrift in Paris. So I will read a bit of one page of this book. Tourists clogged up the decks of the boats, jumping to their feet to point out the Louvre in the far distance behind Shannon. They waved to kindred spirits on the embankment, who looked up from a book or mobile to wave back. It was all very noisy and glitzy. Up in the sky, a kestrel was wending its way towards Notre Dame. Shannon watched its solitary flight. Was it habit that sent it back at the end of the day to that burnt-out ghost? Did the gaping hole in the roof still feel like the majestic spire that it had been only a couple of months ago? How could it be home to the kestrel? Shannon imagined its plight as it tossed and turned in broken-up bits of sleep as the wind whistled through the night. He photographed the brave kestrel on his mobile. What a hero, he thought. It would be Angela's time in Kalulu, that's in the outback farm. Everything stilled in his mind. His thoughts turned to his father. Distantly, but as clearly as crystal, he relived their split-second connection on that farewell visit. He thought how moored his father was to place, and of himself and Guy is the brother, freewheeling here, there, and everywhere, belonging nowhere, not to a person or thing or place. He yearned to latch himself to something that mattered, someone, somewhere. He'd always thought of his father's life as limited and bordered, trapped in by those electric fences and routine, and those lethargic cows in the farm. How much he could have achieved had he cut himself out of them. But even a kestrel wended its way home after a long day, the natural order of things. So, from there, what is my own creative identity in the diasporic space? Though fluid and unfixed, I believe that I constantly lose and find myself in the hyphenated space between two countries. Sri Lanka, where I was born and lived for more than half my life, and Australia, where I have been residing for the other half. In this uncertain space, my characters live out their dream of homing and desires to move on. What does the hyphenated space mean to me? We may define it linearly as a bridge connecting one culture and another. But there is also a more slippery meaning, which as a writer I find quite intriguing. When split with the hyphen rather than connected by it, it suggests something disorienting, caused by belonging to neither culture at the edge of each. The effect then could be of something unpredicted, a frisson perhaps, between who you are and who you are not, who you were and who you are becoming. An inward reaction that resists linear definition, but is important to our notions of who we are in our continued negotiations with ourselves in the world. They say that space becomes place when we construct a roof over it or a fence around it. In Sri Lankan villages, the ambalama, I'm sure there's an equivalent in Bombay for this, the ambalama is the construction of a crude roof that makes of a vacant roadside space a place of rest for homeless travelers transiting through the night. I think that something of this homeless wayfarer lives in my psyche and my characters as we negotiate the hyphenated space between cultures. I think of Mantri here, the protagonist of my first novel, If the Moon Smiled. Hers is a story of migration of a Sri Lankan woman living with her husband and children in Australia. Her deep exile from the host country makes her imagination yearn to return to the homeland where she grew up. And I will read a little bit of that. If the Moon Smiled. 156. Okay. So she's returning to Sri Lanka for a visit. This is the first time I have returned alone to the village after my marriage. People come around to welcome me. They talk constantly of relatives and friends dying in the war. Every family has sacrificed someone close. Then they remember to ask me about my life and family in Australia. Nothing I say seems to register. Everything I say sounds trivial and bland, even to me. So they turn back to the war and to fate. I stand on distant boundaries, peering in. They see me changed. They gaze curiously at the shadows under my eyes. They wonder why I have come back alone without the family. There is a growing sense of claustrophobia. I have faced my own war of betrayals, defeats, death of a kind, and I have become private. Once I did not mind sharing my life with all and sundry. I go down to the river, unheeding my mother's disapproval. I dip into the lazily flowing water. Here, at least, nothing has changed. The bathcloth balloons around my body and I press it down. I loosen my hair and let it spread where it will. I open my hands upwards on the water's surface, languidly remembering all that is familiar, the promise of life. For Aruni, in my second novel, Turtle Nest, Sri Lanka represents her mother, without whom she has grown up in Australia. When Aruni is 18 years old, she returns to Sri Lanka to search out the mother. Only when she belongs to the motherland will she find peace and tranquility within herself, she thinks. But for both, these idyllic returns to the original homeland, be they imaginative or physical, prove dreadfully self-destructive. Their tragedy stems from delusion. The homeland acts for both women not as a regenerative force, but as degenerative and soul-destroying. They do not fit in after their long absence from it, and they are equally misfitted in the host land that seems to offer no panacea for their pain, no substitute for the homeland. It seems that the host land generally is not and I quote, a seamless whole, but a misfitting apparatus. I'm quoting Homi Bhabha here, who in 2015 gave us this brilliant message, which is familiar to us, but in his language, it becomes more and more meaningful. So I'll read that bit again. It seems that the host land generally is not a seamless whole, but a misfitting apparatus in which living peripheral lives with their multiple differences, minority cultures piece into the majority, not belonging there. The Black Lives, so I'm now continuing my own thing. The Black Lives Matter movement is as relevant to Australia as to that other settler country, US. Looking at my writing trajectory, I see it evolving in new ways of seeing the hyphenated space. The hyphen is often erased from academic research these days. Our recent book of essays, Mediating Literary Borders, Asian Australian Writing, edited by Janet Wilson and myself for Routledge. In this book, the hyphen between minority and majority does not exist at all. If anything, this only makes the empty space between them even more precarious than when there was the slight consolation of the bridging hyphen. Without it, I feel that my fragility, my vulnerability as an exiled misfit in the misfitting apparatus is ever more precariously balanced. The descent into a yawning abyss is a constant threat for the characters in my later novels. But therein also lies the creative impetus. After all, as Leonard Cohen sings, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Perhaps this is why, in my novel Softly As I Leave You, the hyphenated space gradually develops into what might be a positive psychological place for Uma, the Sri Lankan Australian woman migrant. Together with her Australian-Italian husband, she redefines herself through Buddhism in a Sri Lankan temple in Australia, from the irrevocable loss and damage that she has endured in Australia. Perhaps this is an ending that attempts resolution through the impossible romantic sublime. But on the other hand, fiction brings home the truth in the strangest possible ways. So I will read that bit from book, Softly As I Leave You. I start with the ending, and here it is. One day, he, that's Chris, the husband, he'll follow her hand as it traces the ancient design of a lotus in full bloom, painted on the walls of the temple. The artist has turned the lotus into a mathematical design, he'll say. It's not the beautiful flower that I know. But you miss the point, she'll reply. You talk of the flower as you see it. The artist has removed its mortality, you see. And when that's done, what is reached is pure form. They'll stand together regarding the flower. Then quietly he'll touch her arm, and quietly she'll let herself be led away. Remembering their son, they will meander out of the temple. Let go of the past and the future, and of the passions, the monk will counsel them. Surrender to the present and to that beautiful silence. Enter the purity of the lotus. See life as transparent light. And perhaps this is also why, now I think in retrospect, that my latest novel, My Van Gogh, from which I read at the beginning, deals with the younger people who are less caught up in the constraints between cultures. They are more diffused psychologically, more being children of mixed marriage, the second generation, and life in the 20th century, global culture, all this apply. They resist being anchored and seek freedom from belonging, even while being envious of those who do belong, as Shannon was reminiscing about his father in the extract that I read at the beginning. The American Chinese geographer Yi Fu Tuan claims that, and I quote, place is security, space is freedom. We are attached to the one and long for the other. Though I came across Tuan's idea only very recently, I think it is deep embedded in my Van Gogh. To demonstrate this, here is a brief extract about how Shannon and Lilou, his on and off girlfriend in France, encounter within themselves and in each other space and place as they drift in Saint-Hippolyte, a small commune steeped in history along the Alsace wine route. Okay, so they're walking through the commune. They were together, but also separate. They walked here and there aimlessly, and towards late evening into the surrounding forest. Shannon touched the irregular surface of a fallen rock, a small reminder of the pagan wall that had fascinated them on the way to Mont Saint Odile. I'd feel safe, wouldn't you, if the wall was still intact and still surrounded us everywhere we went, says Shannon. We'd be confined in the Middle Ages, Lilou said, her voice sounding like late summer wine and heather and buzzing bees. The evening sun cast elusive shadows through the yellowing trees. She drew him away. They were drifting. Shannon didn't know where. Okay. And yet, the deep-seated need to celebrate togetherness, whether it is between cultures or people belonging to different cultures, be it even for a few fragmented moments, is always present in the novel. And I will read you that. It's my favorite bit of the whole book. So I will read you that extract and you can suffer through it. Okay, Carrefour. They lay entangled in each other, her hand in his, a drowsy bird. The room was almost black, a shadow of light across the bed. He could faintly see her face raised beside his. They hardly knew one another. That was beautiful, he said. Thank you, she whispered. It's a gift then. Whose voice, whose words didn't matter. They were etched in him deep inside. He kissed the fold of her elbow. Carrefour, he said, meeting place. He felt the texture, this word so foreign to him. Meeting place, she said, lieu de rencontre. Lips like silk, curves without edges. I was in a gallery last night, he said. I was a little lonely. The light from the table lamp fell in a circle. In the corner, I saw spines of books, faded green, brown, red, with dull gold letters on them. I could make out the writing faintly because I knew them well. But she wanted to touch life, not books. You touched me and brought me to life. If I had your t-shirt, she said, I'd wear it to bed every night. He told her an Australian story. A boy and a girl went walkabout in the forest. Far away from home, they stood before a strange tree. It gave shade and bore flowers like jade. I'm there now under that tree with you. Early next morning, they stood at the window. It was snowing. Tiny white baby birds falling out of the sky. Silent, blurred white world. They went out walking. On the bank of the Loire, she wrote his name and the snow fell and erased it. He knelt down and kissed snowflakes from her face. So, to return to where I began, it is all about belonging, disbelonging, and the yearning to belong in this paper. Measuring one against the other, the freedom that comes with not belonging, however liberating, shows up in my writing as a lonely and forlorn space. It's strange, though, that in the sequel to this novel, entitled The Time is Summer, currently in progress, Shannon returns from France to Australia. He is still suffering from soul loss and anxiety attacks, despite the momentary peace he found in his travels abroad. He is now in the seductive alpine high country of Victoria, where his father's farm is located. How will it go for him? I'm still to find this out. Suicide is rife in the Australian outback farming communities. Will Shannon finally find the inner tranquility that he is craving? So my final reflection on the hyphen in my creative writing is that I go from what I know to what I don't know and to what I want to know. This is my overriding principle, whether I'm writing of the diaspora or about travel or tourism. The rest is about freewheeling until I find my little place of rest, an umbalama to rest my wandering soul in the night. Thank you. Done and dusted.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And, as we are only a few of us over here, I think the floor we can ask the questions right after the talk, because like she's been saying so many interesting things. So the floor is open for questions. And then with your permission, after you ask your questions, if I'm allowed to say a few words on it, I would appreciate it.
Go for it. You can answer the questions, Sridhar. I'm quite happy.
No, please.
I think there were a couple of points made by Sushila Gopal. Would Sushila like to unmute herself, since there are so few of us, and ask Chandani this question or make her point? Sushila, would you like to do that? Sushila's, I think, second, third generation diasporan from Mauritius.
Yes, thank you very much for reading from Van Gogh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay.
I think maybe something's wrong.
Is it okay now?
I can see you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for reading from Van Gogh. I'm looking forward to having the book. These days, I think we will have to wait. I will have to go back to my Kindle. Thank you very much. But I wanted to ask you something. When the moon smiles and so on, women are sad. But I think there are many diasporan women who are quite happy people. When you talk of hyphenated, we might be longing sometimes for life in India or Sri Lanka, but at the same time, we are happy. And maybe we were happier when we could travel. I hope we will go back. But don't you think that diasporans can be happy people too?
Oh, yes. I think I myself am a happy person, I think. So there are a couple of reasons for this. I think that I am a very, though people don't realize it, I'm quite pessimistic in my character as well. So
yes,
I go for the dark wedges of life to explore rather than happiness. I don't see that there's much to write about happiness unless it comes as a resolution. So that's one of the reasons for it. And the other reason is that as creative writers, I think we go for conflict, we go for what is not right, we go for that crack that might have a hidden light, that because of which the light shines through. So I think those, because of that, writers generally go, for myself at least, I go in that direction of looking for what is not right, looking behind received templates of happiness or political agenda or what we see as stereotypical happiness or things like that, which are honestly true. But when you look behind, you see a heap of unresolved problems, unresolved conflicts, fractures. And those are what I like to talk about. It's not as if they don't have happiness, but they get to that happiness through some problem, through some conflict that develops into a crisis that then resolves into, if possible, happiness, if not down spiral.
Would you say that Van Gogh is a happier novel than the previous ones?
If I say it's not, are you not going to read it?
No, I'm going to read it anyway because I read all your writings.
Yeah, I think it is. I don't know whether it is a happier novel, but it's a novel that I feel is my best book. That is that gives 3, 4, 5 dimensions of the power of drifting, of what it means to be a drifting soul, of soul loss. And there are 4 characters: Shannon, who's the protagonist, his brother Guy, who can't commit because he has tried to become a happy person. And he thinks that commitment will make him unhappy because of the early damage done by their mother. And then there is Julie, the partner, the lover, who is French through and through. And there's Lilu, the girl who comes from nowhere and goes back into the nowhere in this book. So she says that she's like the ivy hooking on to a rock now and then not there the next moment, that kind of thing. So yeah, it is, I think the pleasure for me, the pleasure of the read comes maybe not so much in the harrowing story or the drifting story, but in the prose style that I love to write in, the poetic prose. So I love the 3 levels of meaning. You know, the story itself for me, once it's done, I'm relieved. But then I go into the more symbolic level and the more interrogative level. And those are the really challenging bits that then turn the book into a pleasurable read, however miserable the theme.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anybody else with the Professor Nilufer has a question for you.
2 actually. They're not questions, Chandni. You've spoken several times about soul loss. I'm intrigued by that term. And do you connect it to the diasporic state, or is it the state of living in Australia? Maybe I didn't hear you properly, but you also spoke about the suicide being rife in the Australian outback. So is this connection, is there any connection with the soul loss and this high suicide figures, and how do they impact upon the diasporics, whether from different parts of Asia in Australia? I mean,
yeah, I would call it a fashionable new term, I think, that has come in very strongly to Australia or to the internet from after the COVID crisis.
Okay.
Positions of isolation, loneliness. You know, in Australia, I don't know too much about other parts of the world, but in Australia, it led to massive mental health problems among youth, even students who are forced to, you know, bedroom to computer to bedroom to computer. And that is soul loss. It is depression, it is anxiety. But I like the term soul loss because it seems to suggest something more profound, something that is anxiety, depression. They are kind of stereotypes now, they are models. No? Soul loss sounds like very unique and individualized.
Right.
That's what it, I don't think it is exclusively something to Australia, but Australia is a victim of it, definitely, among the youth. And suicide is rife in Australia among young people, particularly in the university. But it's a very bad, it's quite a crisis. Mm.
Thank you. Anybody else with any observations or questions for Dr. Chandanilokuge, please?
Well, I would like to say that
Yes.
that I did enjoy those readings very much indeed, and Chandani, I thought that the prose had a definite feeling, a sense of floating and of dreaming. It had that quality, and yet at the same time, you anchored it all in detail, place and time, in Paris, in the Kestrel, flying, in whatever the people are doing, touching, looking at something, considering a thought, and a very definite sense of belonging. So the two are there in contrast all along, and I think you marry them very well. They're beautifully done.
Thank you, Kevin. From a poet of your kind of caliber, I think that's a great, great compliment. Thank you very much. Because I do spend a lot of time, I think more time on refining the sentence. It must be that English is my second language in the way Conrad used it, you know, so I give more attention than people of first language, where English is their first language, to getting, yeah.
We're all lazy writers. Exactly. Yeah, yes, you work harder. That's it.
But you have actually tapped into the
It's
core.
what yes, it's a distinct feeling of that. It's why I enjoy Conrad so much. He seems to work at it, and he extracts so much more out of the verbs. It's there. It's the situation and the verb. He just brings an extra drop of juice out of it sometimes. Very good. Yes, wonderful. You do too.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any question? Professor Up, do you have a question for Chandani?
Not really. I would have to, this is my first introduction to her work, and I'm a quasi Melburnian myself. I've been there 19, 20 times. This last year, because my daughter, my grandson, they live there, I haven't been able to go. But next time, when they allow us to enter, I'm certainly going to pick up some of your books and read them. I apologize. I have not read anything.
That's okay.
I enjoyed.
It's good to have new readers.
You live in Melbourne? We'll have
I do live in.
We'll have coffee together.
We will too.
So I'm just waiting for them to lift the travel ban. So,
okay.
As we say, inshallah.
Yes.
Anybody else would like to say something? Okay, with the permission of the speaker, I would like to quickly surmise what I thought I had learned from this particular talk. And you can contradict me if I have not gotten you right. She began with Shannon's story, talked about belonging, adrift in Paris. She brought me memories of my Hopkins's Windover. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylights, dauphin, dapple, dawn, drawn, falcon in its riding. Then talked about belonging nowhere, not to a thing or a person. Then an hyphenated space between two countries. And usually we use caught between two worlds, one dead and another powerless to be born. And that was the condition of hybridity, but she talked about living on the edges. And she also used the notion of a wayfarer, which I liked. Karnad exploits it to the core. Then she talked about a return to the Sri Lankan space and asked the question, is there a return back home? But then she was also ambivalent at that point in time because she brought in this definite distinction between the raw and the cooked in the context of nature and culture, and the return into the context of motherland with reference to the sea had a different kind of a meaning, though she did remark that do I fit in has been the question. But the most beautiful thing which I liked about her was right in the initial tone in which she began. She talked about belonging. If I also try to play with the word and break it into the root word and two other words which add more meaning to it. Belonging, long, longing, longing as a continual, to belong, okay? And then ask the question mark or put an exclamation mark. Then we come into the question of space and place, of security and freedom. And finally, she closed it talking about a heap of broken images, to quote Yeats. But in her instance, it was a question of heap of broken conflicts and a particular soul loss. I was touched by the way she had written. Her language, I don't have to carry colds to Newcastle because the poet has already remarked on it. On that note, if I have done you injustice or wrongly understood you, you can comment on it. If not, we will go to the next speaker, Kevin Ireland.
Thank you, Sridhar. I accept your commentary with pleasure. I'm honored to be so beautifully reinterpreted by you. Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, I would like to invite Mr. Kevin Ireland. I know I would like to talk a little bit about Kevin because the reason is myself, Kevin, Janet and Chandani and Alex, we spent a lot of time together in Villa Vigoni. And there I had this first-hand experience of what a poet actually is. And I'd also picked his brains as regards a novel which he had written, which Janet was kind enough to give me. And I also know for certain, we began that conference, actually, Professor Klaus Bierstoffer began that conference with one of Kevin's poems. And at this
yes.
point, yeah, at this point, I would like to humbly submit in the World Contemporary Poetry course, which we are doing, along with Ujjaru Nunkal from Australia, we are also doing Kevin Ireland. Okay, I only wish that we don't mutilate or murder your poems that much, because not much information is available on your work, but we have been forced to tease out and splice out something, and I found out some 30 or 40 pages of notes on you. So I'm laboring through them, but I don't know whether I'm going to do justice to them. Okay. Kevin Ireland was born in 1933 in Auckland, where now lives on the North Shore. He has published 2 memoirs, 6 novels, a book of short stories, and others on fishing and growing old. 8 short stories and 2 memoirs, and 3 of his novels were published by Penguin Books or by Random House. However, he is best known as a poet. His first selected poems was published by Oxford University Press in 1987 in the Oxford Poet Series, and it was followed by a much larger selected poems 1963 to 2013, published in New Zealand by Steele Roberts in 2013. His 26th book of poems was Shape of the Heart, and it was also published in New Zealand by Quentin Wilson Publishing, Christchurch in 2020. His many awards include an honorary doctorate in literature from Massey University, the New Zealand Prime Minister's Award, and the A.W. Reid Award for his contribution to New Zealand literature. He has been a president of New Zealand branch of PEN, and he is now a life member. He is also a vice president of the North Shore Cricket Club, one of the 3 oldest cricket clubs in New Zealand. Kevin Ireland has spent most of his professional life working in various roles on newspapers and magazines, as well as for radio, both in London and in Auckland, New Zealand. He spent 25 years on sojourn in London before his return to Auckland in 1985. So we move from a prose writer who is very lyrical to now a person who writes verse, who is a poet, who is going to be also dramatic. That is also one of the terms or what we found in his entire work. On that note, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I've called the talk Crossing the Borders Between Sojourn and Diaspora, but of course, that's a bit of a disguise, because I'm speaking today as a writer, really, and an observer, but not in any way as an academic. In in recent years, there's been some detailed and very superb studies and analysis of the phenomenon of diaspora. And this has engaged the world's attention, of course, as millions of people have been displaced over recent years, or who have displaced themselves, or they've desired to, they've been ambitious to. In several major regions of the planet, this has happened, but mainly in what we sweepingly refer to as the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. These movements of people sometimes appear to be voluntary, and occasionally they are, of course, as we all know, quite openly forced, but they always originate from irresistible pressures on communities or sections of a community. And now I have to say that I'm not quoting from other writers here, although I could easily have done so by just looking up a few textbooks and finding my way through them. But I want to explore from my own point of view and for myself the attitudes that you've suddenly given me to define. The vast and sometimes I think of as violent pressures, they usually originate from causes or motivations that are political, economic, religious, and they result in, but they also involve ambitions, and in a more general sense, such as a wish to start again. People, I think, depart for somewhere else to create what's often described as a better life. Most of the studies that I've come across have prioritized, naturally, these dramatic displacements for the very obvious reason that they've involved enormous numbers of people, often refugees, or groups of people enduring desperate difficulties, including the prospect of violent death and frightful persecution, extortion, maltreatment, disease, and hunger. So the area of study that I must confine myself to is to comment on a peripheral issue, I suppose you'd call it. I'm concerned with extending the range of study of displacements into some of its more remote and more private reaches. So I'm totally avoiding even the hint of a comparison between sojourn and diaspora, and looking for associations. In the first place, I think it's necessary for me to say that many of us, possibly a majority of us, would describe ourselves as existing in what we vaguely refer to in an up-to-date way as the modern era, which commonly means from the 18th century till today, the ages of industrialization, capitalism, nationalism, scientific discovery, world exploration, literacy, etc., etc. But although we mark off these divisions in human experience as an age of this or that, as sentient beings, we continue to share several dispositions towards activities that I think they haven't changed much through human history. These dispositions we can confidently trace, I think, through our existence as a species in a distinct proclivity towards, well, at least one of these distinctions is a proclivity towards migration, expansion, dispersal. It seems to be part of a definition of what we call our natures. And this disposition helps partly explain our ready reliance on all the varieties of diaspora and of travel and sojourn, which are often confused in our descriptions of them. Sojourn, in its distant form in Latin, is sub diurnum, under a day. It turns up in its old French form as sojourner. And this version and its Middle English borrowing mean much the same thing. It involves a temporary visit, although that could last many months. But modern usage widens this application in a very interesting way to include linger, stay, stop, even to become a resident. It's no longer merely temporary in its meaning, for it usually also implies a journey with a mission. It can certainly still mean a sort of long time abroad, but it's more than that. It's used to imply a stop that has a defined impulse and a purpose. It shares borders with diaspora more closely than with the passing diversions of travel, and now it may last not just for months in that Latin sense of under a day, but it may last for many years and even a lifetime, although it still doesn't feel perhaps permanent to the person enjoying it or suffering it. Diaspora and sojourn are words that have become commonly linked in scholarly study for the same respects that several of their definitions and experiences share. They overlap. For often those who are engaged in activities defined by both words, they retain a nostalgic and sometimes a romantic love, a respect or a hankering for the place that people engaged in diaspora or sojourn have departed from, the land, the dreamed of, mythical, and largely unchanging in their minds, unchanging homeland. And in this talk, it is sojourn that interests me through my own experience, because that's all I can accurately, I hope, talk about. I sojourned from New Zealand to Australia in my mid-20s, and I mostly lived in England, using London as my base, working there for about 25 years. I'd not go so far as to say that human travel is an identifiable instinct, but from our origins as a species, we proved to ourselves to be both voluntarily and compulsorily disposed towards movement, migration, and resettling that enables us, in spite of what we sometimes appear to think of as a contradictory rise of nationalism and patriotism, as well as the growth of permanent cities and the rise of specific cultural identifications. And so that we now describe ourselves with some accuracy also as a species constantly on the move. And in spite of all the deadly risks that this can sometimes involve, for all our love of home and country, we are also a shiftless species. Population movement, individually or in mass departures, accidental or deliberate, voluntary or compulsory, helps define us. The second point I should like to make is that the primary questions that can be asked about diaspora and sojourn select themselves. Why did you feel the need to depart? How did you manage to travel? What were your objectives? What were the problems? Were your hopes realized, etc.? It is here that we make evaluations that test our purposes in uprooting our lives and joining a diaspora, or at least making a serious attempt to sojourn in another country. I think, speaking for myself only, the process of movement and sojourn was profoundly useful. I was unhappy in the New Zealand I abandoned, and I loved the London I moved to, until the shock of the changes that occurred in the political and cultural climate that happened in the early 1980s. I rejoiced then when in the mid-80s I returned to New Zealand after a quarter of a century's absence, with only a very few brief return visits. I must have changed as a person in many minor ways, but I could not help noticing that the country had mysteriously altered, and not just in the expected increase in urbanization. It was as though the country had decided to try to grow up. The curious thing is that during my absence, I had also increasingly thought of myself not as an expatriate, but as a New Zealander and as a New Zealand writer. This was a very important discovery. I had been absent possibly to travel full circle to locate myself. There's a great deal to say about the condition of experiencing the effects of a long and deep immersion into an almost total sojourn. It's been much written about, and I'm not just referring to what is called travel writing as a genre, for although some of it's of very high quality, it seems to me to be specifically aimed at supplying useful background, information, practical guidance, and it's often intended as a kind of substitute armchair thrill for or an adventure. But our wider literatures are packed with the really interesting stuff, the descriptions of sojourn, temporary, but sometimes long-term, displacements that transplant actual people or fictional characters, and transport them to distant locations, and often into unusual and stressful, sometimes real and sometimes purely imaginary circumstances. Memoirs, novels, and a great deal of poetry take us to far off places, even when we are conscious that no one has actually moved sometimes. All the movement has been only in the imagination. The mind becomes restless when it reaches out and we make sojourns of the spirit as we immerse ourselves in the act of reading. Sometimes the sojourn can be that temporary. I would like to conclude, to bring all these very general observations, which have been largely to assist myself to think about all the attitudes and the implications of the word sojourn, by turning the thought of it and all these thoughts on their heads, by declaring that sometimes something very nearly opposite can happen, that for all our travel, sojourns, and displacements, some of us never change, outwardly or inwardly. I should like to illustrate what I'm proposing by quoting a short poem of mine that illustrates a position that I believe, through books I've read and those I've spoken to advance a discovery that whatever the well springs of your diaspora or sojourn, and however the experiences we go through may alter some of our reactions and our views, many of us cannot help also carrying with us all the time a whole baggage of the limitations as well as some of the finer qualities of our earlier experiences and our earlier existences. This is a short, unrhymed sonnet written in 1986, just after I returned permanently after, as I said, a few brief trips back, following 25 years in London to Auckland. And it happened at approximately the same time as the revisit of Halley's Comet, which reappears to our planet every 76 years. It compares my experience of what I came to think of and call my exile, for want of a better word, to the discovery that there was no difference between myself and a snail, which cannot help but exist within its own firmament. That is, the whole enclosure of the outer shell of its complete being, which a snail carries with it on its back wherever it happens to travel. It takes its sky with it. I hope it makes a small stab at a very minor confession, as well as a tiny cosmic definition. People, when I came back, kept asking me the same question as though I was a latter-day kind of Rip Van Winkle. Have I noticed all the changes and differences? I had to object that the changes were ones that I had either read about or I had totally expected. They happen everywhere in the world. They've been happening. And what had happened, in fact, wasn't that the place had changed so noticeably, but that it had grown up. I got used to joking that Halley's Comet brought me back, and I had to admit to myself that it required me to carry on quite simply where I'd left off 25 years earlier. I'd grown older and I had experienced a different life, but here I was still carrying much of the same old baggage. Have I noticed the changes? Answer, what changes? Office blocks? McDonald's? Massage parlors? I'd change if they weren't there. Each time I came back, it felt as though I'd never left. I took my world with me as a snail rides inside its own firmament. Saw no jungles burning with tigers, no cities more real than postcards. I should never have been sent into exile. Irresistible forces had me confused. I was a statue, immovable. See the concrete grey hairs, the scars of collisions. I put deliverance down to the comet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. The floor is open, and I take it, I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Anisur Rahman, a notable scholar, a poet, a translator. I think he's quadrilingual or more, I wouldn't know. He writes beautiful, exquisite Urdu poetry. And I have had the pleasure of listening to his poems, even without knowing the language. As far as his
That's marvelous.
English work is concerned, I think it is something which I've been very fortunate to read. And on that note, I welcome Professor Anisur Rahman to this webinar.
Pleasure to meet you, Answer.
And the floor is open for questions. And anybody who would like to ask anything to Kevin can go ahead, please.
I don't have a question yet.
Yeah.
But I really love the snail imagery, the metaphor, and you've given me a cue, to, the opening image. I can begin my talk. I would steal that image of the snail from you.
Anybody else?
I think, Kevin, I was interested in what you said about having been unhappy in New Zealand and
Yes.
hence having left for London, and then becoming unhappy in London in the early 80s with the change in the political climate, and then returning to New Zealand. Interested because that was the time of my sojourn in the UK, and I experienced firsthand Mrs. T at her worst, and the Falklands War and things like that, and putting the great into Britain, which led to a lot of quarrels with my fellow students in Manchester, British students in Manchester, who were all for Mrs. T at that time and wanted her to put the great back into Britain. So it was very interesting that it was the political climate, in a sense, which made you cut short your sojourn, and you were not comfortable anymore. You were not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It changed entirely. It was so wonderful. It was, I just felt liberated, and everything I'd looked for, and then it closed in, and I realized I didn't belong after all, that I'd been not part of a farewell, of a change of life, that I was there on a sojourn only, and that I was better off back home.
Anybody else with yes, Madam Sushila, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much for making us see the sojourner. Would you agree that the sojourner carries back some part of the time that the person has lived elsewhere? And there is a change when the sojourner goes back home. He's not the same as the one who left. Would you agree to that? That we carry back?
Yes, I totally agree with you. I actually, I felt that I'd been having a really good time, and I threw myself into a lot of work for PEN International. I did the Writers Union. I became president of PEN, and I did a lot of work. I pulled my socks up and did a lot better work of journalism and radio, and work on the Listener here as working for them. And I did I made myself, I put myself about and made myself busy with organizations, volunteering for this and that. And I made myself very busy to show that I hadn't just gone over and been a playboy, that I'd come back to really make a contribution. And I think that was a very important thing to do. And it gave me the stimulus for getting in and getting work done and helping other people to get their work done, which was just as important.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anybody else would like to?
Janet
Yeah,
and Chandani.
both of you have lifted
Yes.
I'll go alphabetically. Chandani first and then Janet.
Kevin, I like very much following on from our little discussion about writing styles, the way you dig out all the meanings of one word. I
yes.
really enjoy that. And can you just elaborate a little more where that love of word finding or synonym finding or antonym finding comes to you?
Yes, I think that's just a habit of mind, Chandani. I think that it's simply a thing I do. It's almost like the way that some people do crosswords or whatever it is. One word just sets off another, and it's a great and it's an exploration. It's like this talk, which is just an exploration. I got onto the word, and it just fascinated me, and it actually took me somewhere. It was a sojourn into the words diaspora and so on, and I meant to write a completely different article. I meant to make a different contribution, but I just meandered on, and I ended up with that little sonnet, unrhymed sonnet, modern type sonnet, and it was just I recorded it. Luckily, I wrote it as I went along and thought about it, and I found myself in a totally different place. I'd actually done that sojourn in the mind.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. Yeah. That's poetry for you.
Yes. So yes, I'm unmuted. No, I have a query about terminology as well, because I was very struck by the word sojourner, because you don't hear it as much as you do hear the words exile and diaspora. And I mean, obviously exile has got this notion of travel without being able to return at leisure, and of being forcibly removed from where you come from, which is, you know, one of the meanings of diaspora, I think, that you were talking about when you said people leave for reasons of famine and war, and, you know, they're pushed out of their countries. They don't want to go, especially, but they're forced to seek another land. But, you know, the term that was always used of people like you in the 1960s onwards was expatriate. And I know it's not used much at all these days. And I just wondered why you chose sojourner instead of expatriate, whether you ever saw yourself as an expatriate, because, you know, it's got a completely different connotation of national sort of identity, expatriate, and of having left your native land. But in many ways, it seems to be almost the same as what you're saying a sojourner is.
Well, I think that the two words do have certain applications that are absolutely identical. But I think expatriate for me is a more definite projection of ambition. It's actually a kind of a more definite word. A sojourn is more, it still has a kind of a hint of vacation about it, as though you're traveling with a purpose, but it's not permanent. Expatriate means permanent. You're out of it, and you've decided to cut off, and you're out. A sojourn has a kind of an implication of return, or of a possible return, or of a kind of non-departure in the mind. And that's what I'm talking about. There's actually an element of non-departure in it. It's diasporic in the sense of spreading out, travel, going somewhere, but it's also a word with mysterious implications that it has attachments. It carries a whole baggage, and I think it's not as definite as expatriate. I think Catherine Mansfield was, expatriate. A person, I never felt that Robin Hyde, if she had lived, would have actually ended up as an expatriate. I think she would have sojourned.
Nilufer?
If I could join in this conversation between Janet and Kevin on sojourner and expatriate, the two terms. I think when we thought of this concept of this talk, we knew that we had a diasporic, we had Chandani, and then we had Rebecca and Kevin, who didn't exactly fit into the diasporic mold, but they had sojourned for long in different places outside their homeland. And so it was diasporic and sojourner. As far as the term sojourner is concerned, I think it's one of those words which Margaret Atwood, in her new collection of poetry, Dearly, which came out last year, says that there are certain words which have fallen out of favor and they'll become quaint and antiquated and nobody uses them anymore. So maybe sojourner is a word like that, but as far as post-colonial theorizing and practice in India is concerned, not in the West, but in the actual former colonies like India, not the settler colonies like Australia and New Zealand, but in the other colonies, the conquered colonies. Sojourner is a term still fairly widely used, and Girish Karnad uses it a lot in his own forwards and in his writing about his own plays. And he saw himself as a sojourner in Britain when he was a student at Oxford, and there was a lot of influence that he brought back from his sojourn to India and to his writing, And actually the term expatriate worries me, Janet, because only a white person is an expatriate, okay? So Ernest Hemingway was an expatriate, but Amitav Ghosh is a diasporic, okay? Salman Rushdie is a diasporic. So it is a very loaded term. There's a lot of power politics when you look into the term expatriate. And that, as a post-colonial theorist and somebody who's been teaching and writing about post-colonialism for decades now, it worries me a lot, and I do not like to use. But of course, Kevin can be an expatriate if he wants to, but of course he prefers to be a sojourner. Great for you, good for you, Kevin. I don't know if others would like to join in the argument.
Yeah, please, Professor Huq.
Yes, I agree. Expat here also has that white man post-colonial context, and it is used. I never use it, the word. But my question to Kevin is, if I understand sojourner in its archaic, medieval term as a pilgrim soul in quest, and for me, a sojourner would be different from a diasporic creature in that a sojourner is in search of something. He is trying to, like a pilgrim soul, he wishes to be transformed by the experience.
We've lost you.
Yeah, I think
I can't.
yes,
I've just lost the sound.
Yes, but
we will take up question a little later.
Yeah, no, she's back. She's back.
Oh, please go ahead, madam.
We lost you for a while.
Did? Oh, I see. I thought maybe okay. Well, I think the ether, there's going to be rain or something. It says your internet is unstable. I hope it stays stable until I finish my talk. Because the atmospheric condition, the warm and the monsoon, the Kalboshaki is coming. So that was my question. Do you think that is the essential difference, that a sojourner allows his spirit, himself, his inner self to be transformed by the experience, whereas the expat or the diasporic creature is more in search of a new homeland space, materially, economically, and the sense of leaving everything behind in a new place?
I'm very glad to welcome the word back. I really feel, I embrace it. It's a wonderful word. I think it's warmer and richer, and it has all sorts of redundancies that that expatriate doesn't have. That's such a definite, it's such a cold word. It certainly is a brilliant word for expressing a definite condition, but it's not the condition that I felt. I don't know if Janet has anything more to
Well,
say.
I do, yes, I do. I mean, I think expatriate has fallen out of favor in diaspora studies, and is to do with this idea of patriality and nationhood, and the fact that it suggests that you are somehow slavishly tied to your nation, and that you've just disappeared for a while and you're going to return with no questions asked, and that you really go back and forth between your nation, your country of birth, and somewhere else, with an idea that you are inevitably tied to it, and nothing has particularly made any difference to that loyalty or that commitment by being overseas. Whereas today people travel for so many disparate reasons, and they often don't necessarily feel bonded to the country they come from, or even obliged to return. And so expatriate is far too much a dogmatic sort of term, in the sense of travel back and forth, rather than travel in circles, or travel into different destinations, or travel with different constructions of where you belong, or even of wanting to create another home in another part of the world that is different from the one that you've come from. So it's become I think a dated word and an unfashionable one, and it's interesting that we use it of Ernest Hemingway, and I guess it is true of that generation, that they all took time off and went to Paris, or they went to Europe, and then they went back to America, and it would apply to some small percentage of people today, but it doesn't capture the zeitgeist of why we move around in quite the same way. And you know, possibly sojourner does open up more potential for considering the motivations and the realizations of travel, and quite often the question of nationhood is not the main one when you're thinking about whether you want to go anywhere else, or whether you want to return, or whether you want to remain.
We welcome Feroz Navroji and Yulia Ruskin, who has got a question. Yulia, if you are there, if you could, I found it in the chat box, so you could ask the question if you
Yes.
are. Yeah,
Hello,
please go ahead,
everyone.
ask your question.
Yes, hello everyone.
Hi, Julia.
Yes, hello, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to join from the beginning, so I only got part of the talk. So my question is related to sojourner, and I have to admit, I haven't thought of using sojourner instead of diaspora, and myself, I have been dealing with diaspora at individual level, and I liked the fact that Professor Island brought this up. So I was wondering if this concept or this word has the capacity to individuate, as I say here, the meaning of diaspora, and to validate its individuality. Moreover, to validate the individual experience rather than diasporic experience as group and community, as many theorists tend to prefer. when we talk about diaspora. So that's my question. So does it, or do you see it as a word that individuates diaspora, capacitates the individuality of diaspora, and if the sojourner has the ability to interrupt whenever you want, and your affiliations, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if I put it correctly. I'm just trying to deal for the first time with the word. And even kind of control your affiliations depending on the experiences that you go through and external factors that interact with your personal experience, because you mentioned the period, the Thatcherite period and so on.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't like ever to suggest, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, that there was even a hint of a comparison between the condition of diaspora and that of of sojourn. But there are what I discovered when I thought about it was that that there are borders that overlap between the two words, and where they do, they're profoundly interesting, I think. But you're definitely right, Julia. The word sojourn has very private reaches that diaspora doesn't share, and I wouldn't like to suggest that it was in any way comparable. I've avoided any possibility of the comparison of the two conditions. I think that they reflect on each other wonderfully and reveal each other in interesting new ways, but I wouldn't like to suggest that what I have to say, that what I'm trying to say at least, is of equal importance at all.
Chandani?
But it's a condition that everybody
Yes.
suffers.
It just came to me that sojourn has that touch of romance that neither diaspora nor expatriate has. Am I right? I mean, and that's why it's a kind of word that reaches into heart and soul more than the other two. And there are possibilities there that are expansive, or I don't know what is the word, romantic, I think is the word there. No? A walk can be
One word is a poem by itself. That one word is a complete poem for me.
Janet wanted to say something.
Just a brief comment, because in the literature, the idea of the diaspora is usually of a community of people that have resettled in another country. And you can talk about individual diasporans, but often you talk about them because they are connected up to other people who are also like them, and they've distanced or dislocated themselves from their homelands. So there's that to consider. And I don't think sojourner is it doesn't take that meaning at all. It really is, as you've described yourself, Kevin, someone who goes off for private or individual reasons. But I think when you were in England, for example, you knew other New Zealanders, you formed a community, and then you were part of a diaspora. So there is that slippage between your motivation to leave and what you did when you arrived in another part of the world. But you know what I'm actually thinking now is, what do they call people like me, and maybe some of you others here, but I think I'm the main culprit. I have become a returnee. And there's many of us in New Zealand in particular who flooded back because it's a safe place. And we weren't planning to, and we weren't particularly diasporic or sojourners, but we fled back home because it was the possibility of that.
Good common sense.
Yes. No, but in time to come, we may be given another name. I think returnee is a very kind of pragmatic term. that covers the immediate urgency of having to come back before the borders close. But maybe will be described differently.
Yeah, I think Sushita has just written a paper for us in our new book, to which Janet has just done a foreword for us, and she has done a whole article on this returnee phenomenon. And you are right. I mean, Kevin didn't think of himself as a diasporic. The New Zealand diaspora in London might have claimed him. Like the Indian diaspora in Germany reaches out its tentacles. Is a negative word, but reaches out its lovely little fingers to us whenever we are there in Germany.
Of course.
And we get invited to all sorts of events and dance programs, and the food usually is very good. So we do go and participate, although we are not part of the Indian diaspora in Germany.
Sure.
Sushila, you want to add something?
Yes. May I? I will be very brief.
Yeah.
There is the individual within the diaspora, and Professor Nilufer has brought the word diasporan. That's one thing. Secondly, I think sojourner, séjour, will be more and more used, because the diasporan, when he goes back home, is not very much satisfied. The diasporan comes back to the host land. So the time she spends in the homeland becomes a séjour. It will be a visit. And I think very often we have said now the return will be only a visit. So the séjour will be most probably used more and more. Thank you, Professor Allen.
I'm not a professor.
I think if there are no other observations or questions, and if I can take a simple 1 minute or something to share whatever I learned from Kevin's talk. Yes, he brought in the distinction between disposition, migration, expansion, dispersal, and this is how we had actually started. And on a flippant note, the way we had looked at the term sojourner and other words which had accompanied it, I think I've come to realize there is nothing called use. It's either overuse, misuse, underuse, profuse, abuse, or whatever we want to call it. We have actually looked at so many different aspects of that particular term. And what was very interesting in the original use of Kevin was that he was talking about a journey with a mission. So he extended the meaning and made the sojourner a very, very loaded term. That is what was very, very interesting for me. And he also attributed a value and some kind of a worth to it in the context of giving it a defining purpose and how it moves away or how it translocates the world from the realm of travel into that of diaspora, which is what I thought was very fascinating for me. And to quote a simple statement from Buber, not everyone who wanders is lost. I would like to add after this talk, especially if he is a sojourner. The other thing I want now, which puzzled me, was the metaphor or the symbol of Rip Van Winkle. So when is the sojourner? When is he sleeping for 20 years? Or at what period is this Rip Van Winkle metaphor getting wedded to that of a sojourner? On that note, thank you very much for a very exciting talk and a session. And I apologize to Kevin actually, because when I introduced him, I forgot to talk about his title. And I was lucky that he announced the title himself when he started speaking. On that note, I would now like to introduce Professor Rebecca Huck. She is affiliated with Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop. Rebecca Huck is a poet, writer, translator, professor, and former chairperson, Department of English, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. With a gold medal for distinction and masters in 1980, she was one of the founding members of the Bangladesh Association for American Studies. which she did in 1984, and subsequently served as book review editor of the Bangladesh Journal of American Studies between 1996 and 1998. In 1995, she received a certificate of distinction as scholar in residence at UCLA and Vanderbilt University, United States of America, for a summer course on 20th century American interdisciplinary studies. Methodologically, Rebecca Huck's literary criticism falls under the rubric of psychoanalytic criticism. She began serious research in women's studies in January 1985 with a 6-month stint at Leeds University, England, under the guidance of Professor Sally Shuttleworth. As a Skillum scholar at Dalhousie University, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada in 1990-91, she did advanced research and writing on the literature of the two world wars with Professor Roland Smith as a supervisor, and chose Anita Bruckner's semi-autobiographical novels to write a dissertation on the theme of European emigres, exile, displacement, and cultural dislocation. Professor Huck's areas of special interest with publications are Romanticism, Elizabethan and Jacobean drama with a concentration on Shakespearean drama, 20th century British and American fiction, poetry and drama, film studies, South Asian studies. Presently, her work as critic is subsumed within the broad category of cultural studies, underpinned with advanced study of psychology, anthropology, history, art and antiquities, cinema, and the performing arts. With Bangla as a mother tongue, she is fluent in Urdu and has working knowledge of Latin, German, and French. She writes only in English and translates from Bangla into English. আমি এখানে বসেছি আপনার কথা শুনবার জন্য. On that note, I invite Professor Rebecca Huck. The title of her talk is Go with the Flow, Creativity with the River of Life.
Thank you. Shukriya. Dankeschön. Now, I'm not going to read, I did not write an academic paper because for years and years, I've been teaching diasporic literature when it became fashionable. In the 80s, we shifted as, time had this cover, The Empire Writes Back with Salman Rushdie. So we had this academic shift, included more and more works from writers in India and South Asia writing in English. Incidentally, my first language is English. I learned Bangla as an adult. I learned Urdu as a toddler in Pakistan. So I've had a very peripatetic life because my father was in the army, and as an army brat, we moved from station to station. And every 2 years, I would get, say, when are we moving again, Daddy? Because I love to go from one place to another. Very curious child, very precocious, and loved wherever, loved the culture, the food, the people, the language. And the title that I have taken is Go with the Flow. Actually, Go with the Flow is based on the positive psychological theory of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Sorry, I can't. I'm just going to, it's a name which you trip over. He is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's talk about flow. You become absolutely immersed, and then you have this impulsive, epiphanic, creative flow. So that is what happens to me. I am not a serious writer in the sense that I spend 2 or 3 hours locked away in one cloister writing. It just comes to me, and I've been, I love literature, it is a passion. And I became a serious writer when my political consciousness got embroiled in the politics in Bangladesh. 16 years of my life was spent in Pakistan, the West Wing. So Urdu, I learned Urdu to read and write Urdu with English as my first language. And having returned to my motherland, to my homeland, to Bangladesh in December 1973, I slowly learned to speak Bangla, to read, to translate, and I still struggle with the script because the adult hand is not so, does not have the facility of writing. I have to practice more. So that is the background. I've always been very conscious of the oppressive condition of women. I've been very lucky in a land where women are oppressed, have been under patriarchal laws. Our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, our grandmothers were deprived of the letter of all rights. They were, in other words, chattel. So I'm very involved with women's movement. I'm an activist. As an academic, I see my role as a change maker. And that's where my writing flows. I've not written fiction, only one story. People say, why don't you write short stories and write a novel, I don't think I'm there a novelist in me, because I'm an observer. I'm immersed in my culture. I'm rooted to Bengal, to East Bengal. And Nilufer said in the first few moments of just chit chat, where Rebecca will, tell us whether she's a diasporic creature or a sojourner. I'm neither. Wherever I go, to borrow again Professor Kevin Ireland's image of the snail, that metaphor, I carry Bengal on my back wherever I go. We've had such a rich secular cultural environment in my grandparents, from my mother's side, not my father's side, and the fact that I was born in the Gangetic Delta, the rich cultural tradition of music, of literature, arts has always influenced me, because in our families, literature flourished, dance and the arts, performing arts. These were all nurtured and cultivated. And I'm a kind of a paradoxical creature. I was very athletic. I was a gymnast. And I was also a bookworm. I would go out and play gulli danda, hockey, until the age of 14. And then but in school, in colleges, I would have this space to myself. I would head for the library. I'd be there. So these contradictory elements are in me. And when I say go with the flow, the title is Creativity in the River of Life. I deliberately take the image or the metaphor of the riverine lower Gangetic Delta, which is East Bengal. And East Bengal historically has been, invaded, conquered, or has had voyages from the Portuguese to the Arabs to the Greeks, and the Bengali woman. In her bloodstream, you have the blood of all races and ethnicities of the world. So I have this secular, very, very rich cultural tradition of which I'm very proud of Bengal. Wherever I go, I talk a lot because they want to know. And initially, because of that geographical position of Bangladesh now, like a funnel, you have these tornadoes and these cyclones, and we were, I've seen to have lost, I'll take this off. It's more for dinner parties, not as a speaker. So, and under the colonial, kind of quasi-colonial rule of Pakistan, we were deprived of any progress, of any facility, they exploited us, they took our resources, but they did not develop East Bengal or East Pakistan. And they even tried to muffle us, impose Urdu on us. And that, you know, is the history of the creation of Bangladesh. And so we fought for the language. 1950, there was the killing, there was martyrdom, and now we have the International Language Day because because young students of Dhaka University were killed because they wanted to keep their Bangla language. And we all know the history of how we fought for our liberation, and India came to our rescue. There was a guerrilla affair. So we know all that. That is part of me. My dream was to share my knowledge, my love of knowledge. And I entered Dhaka University. I've been 41 years. I will be going into retirement end of June this year, but I work as a resource person and as a consultant. I have mentored students who are teaching. Now, this lower Gangetic Delta is with me wherever I go, but I've traveled a lot, except the continent of Africa, which is my next goal, on my bucket list. I have this tendency to not to carry any food from home, not to eat the food of home, but to try their food, because I love tasting and I love the crafts, and I seek out local crafts, weavers, folks, and I compare them and I see parallels and similarities in motif and design and handiwork in all the world's crafts. And it occurs to me that before the continents drifted apart, Gondwana land, the migrations, great migrations, they must have had a shared knowledge of how to make things out of straw and bamboo and leaf, because our indigenous tribes, the things they make, and our weavers, the patterns, the Guatemalan Mayan patterns I see in our Chakma and Hitrak region weavings, and our goldsmiths, and you have such rich historical record of travelers coming from China, from all the others, talking about Golden Bengal and the work that they do. So this is all there in me. And in the late 1980s, an horrific event occurred, which was in this area, with Islam coming in with the Tughlaqs in the 11th, 12th, or 13th century. Before that, Bengal was the Pal, the Sens, Buddhist, and then the Sens, and then Islam with Ala Khilji, the Tughlaqs. You had a certain radical part of the Islamic movement. And one woman, she was stoned to death for alleged adultery. So that created a kind of storm among educators, and there was a movement in Bangladesh that things have to change. And from the 80s, our priority has been female education, female emancipation, and we have now our women, really the strong third force of the country. So I wrote a piece for the Daily Star, an opinion piece in the late 80s, and that's when my association with the Daily Star newspaper began. It's been 35 years, I'm still writing for them, columns, op-eds, literary page, book reviews, and the title of that first, I was assistant professor then, and the title of my essay was "Not the Doll's House, : in praise of Noura. not Nora, because the girl who was killed, stoned to death, in a pit by these religious fanatics. Her name was Noor Jahan. Noor Jahan, means light of the world. Noor is light and Jahan. So I said, in praise, not the doll's house, in praise of Noora. So that there I talked about how it is time that we reverse this negativity about women, this suppression of women. And then the editor, he wrote to me and he said, we'd like you to write for us. And so I've been writing regularly. And at the same time, I have been writing creative pieces, nonfiction, for the Weekend magazine for nearly another 30 years. It went, because of lack of sales, the Weekend magazine stopped publishing, coming out in 2015. So you have now the Daily Star main paper has a once a week Thursdays. It has DS Books where you can write literary pieces or creative book reviews, and you have every Saturday the literary page. Now the literary page started in mid-90s, and we got an invitation from Mahfouz Anam, who's the editor. He sent personal letter and phone call by the literary page editor then to 5 of us in the English department. I was the junior most, that I want to bring out a literary page supplement. We would like you to write for us. So the literary page had its beginning, and I've been writing, and from 95 to 99, my poems and some of the non-fiction essays are collected in my first creative writing book. And at the same time, I love to do conferences and seminars. So I've been traveling and writing there. And so writing comes to me easily. It sort of cooks in the head, simmers, I put in spices and then, just when it's ready to take from the stove, put the pot down, I have this, I sit, and that's my method. That's just how it happens to me. I just sit and the flow. Sometimes the writing takes over. And for me, the title is important. The title gives the piece a structure, the motif or the structuring image. And that's how I write. And I'm a night owl. Perhaps I would have an epiphany, or I feel very strongly about some issue because I'm very politically conscious, aware of what my society, what is happening, what is, what needs. So I would have an idea, would scribble some points down, and it would cook itself. And I would start writing maybe after 12 in midnight, and I'm most alert at the witching hour, 3 o'clock. And I would send it off at 5 o'clock. So the flow is kind of mental, or some kind of pressure I feel that if I don't let it out, if I don't give it birth, I have to finish it there. And then I sometimes, now with age, with my 4th and 5th vertebra, with the curvature, I sometimes can't stand, so I have to fly flat. So this is me, this is the creature that I am. I was invited to write one short story, an original short story for the Independence Day. March 26th is coming, our 50th Independence Day. And in 2016, the editor sent out an invitation and I said, I've never written a short story. And he says, your non-fiction creative pieces are like stories. Why, you write one for us. So I sat down and thought about it. And then it just came to me, one story based on a real life event. My aunt had told to me in 1974 or 5 about how her school friend running away, fleeing the onslaught of the Pakistan army, was running with her infant held in the crook of one arm and holding her daughter in the other. And as they were running in the melee, the crowd, the girl, she lost the grip on the girl. She never found the girl. Maybe they were fleeing to the villages or trying to cross the border into India. So that was for me, that was such a traumatic story. It stayed with me. And I wrote it as I imagined myself as the mother. And I wrote the story, which was, published with an illustration from a famous painter, Murtaza Bashir. The title I gave it was Midnight Marathon. So that is my one work of, well, it's a short story, but I've written other, I have this, and now I have the 8 people, my friends, very good friends, my family in the New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific. They're saying you have enough to bring out 2 more books. And I said, yes, if I have the self-discipline. I'm such a freakish, impulsive creature, a multi, I do so many work. I don't have, as he said, Ravi Shankar said, you must learn to sit down and write like a professional writer, but I cannot think. For me, it's a passion. I still think of it as a hobby. I'm still an academic. So maybe from 1st July 2021, when I have no more salary or at the end of the month, maybe I'll sit down and become a professional writer and write for, 2 taka per word. So this is go with the flow. I would like to read, with your permission and your patience, I would like to read one of the non-fiction creative pieces that I weekly it just would flow out of me, the experiences where I have been. And this is from, I think, 2012 or 13. And there's a lot of myself in it. And this is how I write. Words for me are concrete, tangible. Every word for me has not only denotation, connotation, it is a picture. This has been like from a very young age, even when I was 3 years, 4 years old, the English, every word, I see it as a picture, as a 3-dimensional. I can even, feel, taste, or kind of chew on that word. So that is a kind of a weird thing that my mind does. So I will read this. Sweet springtime snapshot. Springtime in Melbourne, her 5th time in this abode of blood ties and new generation, but her first in this season of renewal. The petite, bespectacled brown scholar walks out of the Baillieu Library of the University of Melbourne with a sheaf of notes on a shimmering Saturday afternoon. Her small footsteps quickly seek the shade of the old medieval style arched pathway and out again, almost running in the sunshine across the quadrangle down to the main street for the train, which will take her to the city center. She anxiously lifts her left arm to peer from the top of her myopic lenses at the tiny oval face of the analog wristwatch. The Melbourne Writers' Festival is on, and she has eagerly planned on strict punctuality to attend 2 important sessions listed under the fiction and poetry category. She takes out a thin notebook and a ballpoint pen from her large floppy shoulder bag upon entering the large room on level 2 at the Yara building in Federation Square. She's feeling good, smartly attired and confident in her chosen element, eyes limpid with anticipation and suppressed excitement. She finds an empty chair in the third row next to a burly elderly gentleman who smiles and initiates a general conversation with the opening gambit. So, what brings you here? Without batting an eyelid, she smiles back and casually, demurely replies, well, literature is my area and I've come a long way. Spring shower and sparkling rainbow beads on leafy bushes 2 hours later, and she sits near the esplanade by the Yarra River beyond St. Kilda Street. She caresses the luminescent virgin covers of the 2 books, collections of the fascinating new genre of microfictions she has just bought at the booth in the cavernous atrium attached to the National Gallery of Victoria. The interaction during Q&A session had both Rodney Hall and Josephine Rowe pleasantly smiling up at her as they wrote her name before signing their individually authored collections. She had asked them to add the name of the city after the flourish of signature and date. They do. Silent in the cool breeze, serene amidst the panorama of lush grass on the sloping banks and the canopy of glistening flowering trees under fluffs of gliding cumulus clouds, she feels in her heart the prelude to a Wordsworthian symphony. Enveloped thus in such solitary anonymity, she bites into the orange tangy crescent mandarin piece, almost swooning as the rich sour sweet juice of the pulp mixes with the bitter strong spray of the slithery peel to give her a cocktail kick in the nose and the gullet. Overcome momentarily with an organic rush of inexplicable melancholy, she sways on the crest of a wave of wistfulness with the faint waft of a desire for sensuous company, for the romance of magic eyes and the loving deep voice. She leans gently forward and flirts coyly with the mirrored river currents and the fluttering speckled spring blossoms. Her wet lips suck in fresh air, and she softly exclaims, ah, Keats, thou shouldst be living at this hour. Sliding into psychosomatic reverie, a series of streaming telekinetic imagery of memory and music flow from the hidden recesses of the frontal lobe. Reality and illusion form a double helix for a few seconds. A low, self-mocking, lilting trill of a song escapes her larynx as soon as she stirs the fumes in her brain to unravel the entangled, elongated strands to gaze clearly at the separate skeins of sensual experience. The black steel-rimmed spectacles lie on her lap, and the mascara-laden eyelashes dip for 7 seconds while she is meltingly awash in the surround sound of Satyajit Ray's enchanting Charulata in the garden on the swing, offering Tagore's divine verse to the firmament. Spontaneously born of close, dearly felt association perchance, with similar expression of feminine vocal creativity, a vivid photo montage of reality rolls into the scholar's mind. Supersonic cinematic speed shuttles the woman sitting by the Yarra on the ancient Aboriginal ground 5 decades back in time to the land of her birth, to the flat floodplain, the intricate snaky tributaries, and the muddy, splashy energy of the paddy fields of East Bengal. She sits up, alert and quietly still in the present, the pupils of her widening eyes looking deeply inward, engaged with unlocking the portal into previous life. Miraculously, she is suddenly back in the warm, picturesque hilltop bungalow in Kumilla Cantonment in the year 1963, on the evening of a special northern spring day, which even now makes her glow with complete contentment. She sees it all again, feels it all again, the thrill and the surge of joy. It is after Maghrib, and she is sitting on the big bed in her parents' tidy room. Her brothers are sitting by her side with shining eyes and adoring faces. They're all watching their mother. Mother and father are invited to a grand dinner party where mother is going to sing a Tagore song. The light bulb over the dressing table casts its golden rays upon the whole family. And now the scholar sees it all in slow motion, as in a mind tableau. Mother is regally draped in a cream and maroon Murshidabadi silk sari with the cream silk blouse tailored in Newmarket, Dhaka, in the chic high collar style favored by Suchitra Sen in the films of that era. In repose with the gold jhumka earrings, the striking features, the long, thick, silky hair coiled in a neat bun, and the elegant, slender figure, her mother does resemble Suchitra. Parenthetically, I write, in fact, a female guest with a loud voice mentions this resemblance. Mother is demure and shyly turns her face away. Father acknowledges with a lingering smile of inner pride and proprietorship. Later, secretly, mother shares this party potpourri with a little girl, and they both dissolve in embracing love and laughter. Mother has a clear, beautiful voice, and she sings her favorite Tagore songs all through the day as she cooks and sews, or at night when she serenades her little ones into sweet dreamland. For tonight's rendition, she has practiced singing along with Konika Bandyopadhyay on the long playing record, with father lifting the arm of the gramophone needle to place it back or forth on the exact groove to help replay any particular lyric. Tonight, before leaving for the party, father requests mother to sing the entire song once again without accompaniment. She sits facing her children and gathering the paisley archel in a fan fold on her lap, she starts to sing. The melody and the lyrics smoothly slice the expectant tension in the little girl's heart as she hears the sweet tones, as sweet as any Shantiniketan artist. It is perfect for the little girl, the perfect seed time, the whole wide world reverberating in one small room with the promise of freedom and limitless possibilities. Heaven in a woman's voice. A shadow of a mist beneath her eyelids streams the scholar silently back to the declining sun over the Yara. Next Saturday, she has to return north past the equator to the hectic life of heat and dust, of working and playing, laughing and crying, loving and caring, arguing and soothing, a life crowded with people and noise. The evening alone by the spate, this evening alone by the spate of softly flowing water. Her heart is the throbbing, glowing ember rekindled by the springtime snapshot from the heart. Suddenly, lyrics from her own special Tagore song, the one which hypnotizes, mesmerizes her heart, float to her tongue and vibrate in her sinews. Dolao, dolao, dolao amar hridoy. Cradle my heart. Next week, she will gently part her heart, leaving the right ventricle over the Yara for her only child to cradle, and fly away with just the left ventricle for the old mother at home to cradle in the city by the Burigonga. Thank you for your patience. So that's the kind of stuff I write, as opposed to the very politically conscious stuff I write for the Daily Star. But there again, a lot of literature, comes in. The anxiety and the influence you cannot. But I love to play with words, and as you know, my training is psychoanalytic because my father was an internationally renowned psychiatrist and from the age of 4 or 5, I was very precocious. I used to take his penguin books and just read the case histories like stories. So when I first wrote my first academic article, when I became a lecturer, and you had to, because unless you publish in the first 2 years of being, you're getting appointed in a tenured position as a lecturer, you're not made permanent, and your salary increment will not. So I wrote The Virgin and the Harlot in Tennessee Williams, which again borrowed everything from Havelock Alice to, all these. And I'm a very conscious Jungian. Freud seems to be out of fashion these days. So that's okay. Fini.
Thank you very much, Professor Rebecca Huck. Any questions, anything you would like to ask the professor, and any observations, anything you would like to add? The floor is open.
If I might say here that I was particularly, what would you say? I was particularly attracted to the kind of writing that Rebecca was doing, and I was reading bits and pieces of it in the various extracts and attachments that she would share about the time she had spent as a young girl in Pakistan. And that was particularly of interest to me, because I don't know, but I could discern. She did say that the Pakistanis had colonized East Pakistan, and they felt like, in a sense, they were decolonized, they achieved independence. So this was a kind of a colonial child in writing. Maybe now, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into her writing, and she's right here, she can speak about it. Writing from a post-colonial perspective, kind of re-memory writing that we talk about so much in the diaspora today.
In a sense, because we Bengalis in the armed forces, there was this kind of boundary, we have carried. They found us strange, because they knew very little about Bengal. They did not understand or bother to understand or learn the Bengali language, and our cultures are so different, with the Pakistani Punjabis and the Pathans and their tribal, their Moris, they're very different. So even in the armed forces, we Bengalis would be a cohesive group, sometimes interacting in school, like I went to English medium convent schools, or I did just before the war began, I finished my higher secondary at Vikarun Nesanoon, Chaklala, where I mingled, and I was in the middle of all girls from all classes and all, regional places in Pakistan. There would be Punjabis, there would be Sindhis. In Karachi, I was in St. Joseph's for 1 year. But their attitude to us, was, yeah, we are short and dark. But that's not true. Here, if you put C5 Bangladeshis, Bengali girls in West Bengal also, because Bengal was divided twice, partitioned not only in 1947, we have the famous 1912, and then Bangladesh became Bangladesh war. So Bengal was all, because of all the voyages and all the invasions, 5 other beside me, one would have looked like an Afghani, one would look like it would have blue eyes and look like Greek. Another would be absolutely, in Sri Lanka, they say, are you Sinhala? In Mexico, they say, are you Mexican? In Canada, they kept saying, are you Mexican? At Heathrow, this tall hijab wearing Arab lady, I think from Jordan, La Arabia. So you see, we all kind of have all this. So it's, but for them, the Pakistanis, we were weaklings. We are not a warrior race. We are a race of makers, goldsmiths, creators, fisher folk. And yes, what they did, were in awe of, was our, fish eaters. You have good intellects. You are machli khata hai Bengali. So otherwise, we always felt like outsiders. We never belonged. My father, because of his profession, he was in the Army Medical Corps. We were there. And then 3 years when he did his higher degree at Maudsley and Bethlehem in Edinburgh, those 3 years in England were wonderful for me. I was placed in St. Martin in the Fields Grammar School, and that was when the impact of the Vietnam War, Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther assassination, Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, everything, Biafra War. I was going to class, I was coming home, and I would switch on the TV and I would see the Napalm Girl live, witness. All that is there. And that sort of, the Beatles, Yoko Ono and John Lennon. I'd come home at 5, I would just watch for an hour and then do my homework. And then I would switch it on, and on the news, Yoko Ono and John Lennon are doing their nude anti-Vietnam protest. So I was there living it, absorbing everything. I was, as a baby boomer, from the Elvis thing to the Woodstock thing to the rock and roll to the Motown, Tamla Mot, I've lived it. And that was my adolescence.
Yeah,
It's all there, and these memories are there, and something triggers and I write, and in the context of from the present. So when I write a memoir, it will be, the crucial question will be, do I write then as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, or do I write the whole thing from this perspective? So that is the question I have to figure out before I've written bits and pieces, accumulated pages from my Bengal journal. So let's see what happens. So I never thought of myself in these terms, post-colonial and all these. Of course, as an academic, I learned the jargon, but I only felt the discrimination, how they would, look down upon, laugh at our language when we spoke. So I felt all that racism and that kind of denigration and this lack of sort of understanding of our culture and of the skills we have as a people. So that, but now that you mentioned post-colonial, I would not say I'm a post-colonial being, but then that would bring in all the British Raj and all that, did my grandmother think of herself as a post-colonial, as a colonized? So,
Professor Chandani has got a question for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Rebecca, that was very interesting. Now,
sorry, who's speaking? I can't see the name. Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
So when you said that you carry your baggage, your Bengali baggage.
Not baggage. No. Never. I've never ever felt like settling in any other country. I'm my best self when I'm in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. I was born in Dhaka, 14 generations.
So that's what you carried with you, right?
My heritage. I'm a very proud, deeply rooted, 100% Bengali. I don't consider my culture, I'm not out to escape. I go to collect richness, acculturation, melding, I bring back, I share.
Yeah, my question is this.
But I have met people, diasporic people in Melbourne, in England, who have this baggage and who this emphasis on seclusion and halal and the difference and all that. I'm lucky in that I belong to I'm privileged in the sense that I belong to a family on both sides, very enlightened, and we believe in cultural pluralism. So everything, all religions, that I have no biases against this or that, but I see what you mean, that many Bengalis living in diasporic conditions carry that baggage, and that's why you have this extreme, sometimes, they have to practice a religion because they're afraid the second generation will lose it or something. So I observe as a sociologist, as an anthropologist, but that is not me.
Rebecca, I think what Chandni means is that like a snail, you carry your clothes on your back.
I object to the use of word baggage.
She meant baggage.
So that is why I said that I'm going to take the image of the snail, the Bengal, the pride of Bengal, its festivals, its colors, its music, its literature, its song, I carry with me and I share with everybody. I invite, and people want to come because all they know is it's a poverty-stricken land, nothing else, only typhoons and cyclones.
Sorry, please don't be offended by my use of baggage.
I'm just
it was exactly.
I'm not offended.
No, it was exactly what Nilufer is saying. It was that you carry this whole culture with you. My question was very simple. It was that when you, for instance, listen to John Lennon or any of the celebrities of that time, and did your perception change?
Perception of what?
Perception of the Western culture. Did it have any effect of on your Bengali culture, or on the way you were thinking at all, or did the two kind of come together beautifully, seamlessly?
No, again, I wish to draw attention to the fact that I am not what you would call a typical Bengali.
Okay.
Because usually, in our middle class, or women would not have the kind of freedom, the kind of education, liberty, emancipation that I've had. And the opportunities that my father opened up for me, took me, my curiosity. I would want to bring the book. They would take me to the potter, to the weaver. I would sit there and see. So what happens? I jokingly say that with my color, dark brown color, and my short stature, if I had been born in a rural village to a farmer, what would have happened to me? Goes in the kitchens, do the dishes. You won't find a husband. I have no dowry. You are not fair. We are so racist. And I would have been given no education. So it's sheer luck that I was born into this enlightened family, and I was given this education and this freedom. I'm the only girl among 3 brothers, and we have very few girls in the family. And my father, till menage, he gave me every opportunity to play out, and to be. I did not realize I was a woman until I turned 14. I was one of the boys. So and books and books and books. My grandfather's the cabinets of law books, those cabinets I inherited. And I would go down, and every 2 years, we would come back for a 2-month holiday to Dhaka, and we'd be excited. And living in Dhaka, in Armanitola, and that's the old part of town where my grandfather had his 2-story house. I would rummage through my uncle's bookcases, my grandfather's bookcases, my father's old bookcases, and my father never forbade me. Like, Milton says in Areopagitica, he let me develop my own moral sense. I read Henry Miller, Tropic of Cancer at 12. I read William Burroughs' Naked Lunch at 13. And you see, so this has made me, I'm here even in Dhaka now. I'm an outsider, but an insider as well. So I have this dual consciousness, this double
So productive, very productive,
Yes,
multidimensional kind of
that's my good
multicultural.
fortune that I have this ability, which whereas people do not understand me, misunderstand me, and because they have not had this exposure. The more you travel, the more you expose and you accept other cultures, that enables you to free your mind. And they ask me, like, in the international conferences, you're a Muslim, why don't you wear a hijab? So, and like these odd questions, I see all the Bengalis we know wear hijabs. So I said, it's a choice, it's a personal choice. We are not compelled to. So these odd questions, because they see like 75, 80% like this, and this one is such a weird creature. Where did she come from? Is she really Bengali?
Thank you, Professor Haq. I take this opportunity to welcome Professor Somdatta Mondal also to this webinar, and I forgot to introduce her a little before when I noticed her. And are there any other specific questions or any observations to Professor Haq? Okay, on that note, I would like to, with her permission, say a few.
Maybe Somdatta wants to say something.
Yeah, Somdatta is a close friend.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
Somdatta for years.
Yeah, Sridhar.
Actually, I forgot the timing, that it was from 2 o'clock. I had the wrong notion that it would begin at 4 o'clock. So I was chatting with a friend, and once he left, I said, I have to now join a webinar at 4 o'clock.
We are already keeping these Australians and New Zealanders out of their bed.
I'm so sorry, I wanted to be there from the beginning, but it was some kind of a
recording
slip.
is available, yeah. So
Anyhow.
The recording is available, I think. The recording is there.
Recording will be there.
We will share it with you. You missed two excellent talks, actually. One from Chandanilokuge and one from Kevin, and at least you were there for Professor Rebecca Huck.
Yes.
And we are very proud to have you with us, and we consider it our privilege. And just with your permission, Professor Huck,
yes.
She said that she carries Bengal with her wherever she goes. And that is what Professor Chandanilokuge also actually meant. And the point is, this word baggage has got, to some of us, different connotations, in the sense like you carry it on your back, it becomes a backpack. If you carry it as a load, it becomes a millstone around the neck. So in that sense of the term, there is a part of which dies with you and a part of which you carry, and you rub knuckles against the grain, like your poem actually did when you went down to Australia, and when you started talking, and finally when you looked at the dirt, squalor, mud, whatever you want to call it, and it brought in memories of your own land back home. So there was this kind of a fusion, and there is this notion of wherever we travel, we have those images which we carry, and we carry them with us. And it becomes a palimpsest. It becomes a palimpsest in that sense of the term. So it's wonderful. And I also would like to go through your talk, walk down memory lane in that sense of the term. And you were a gymnast, yes. That it makes me ashamed to look at myself in the mirror. And to you, the personal is the political. And you specify with no uncertainty, it is East Bengal, which you carry. That was far more interesting for me, okay? Though I know East Bengal, being born in Calcutta, East Bengal to me is only a cricket team or the place where Mashweta Devi hails from. So I don't have a first-hand experience of
you must come over.
Yeah, having lived there other than during the Durga Puja times when we used to cross over when it was,
from West Bengal.
yeah, when it was quite simple. And I really liked the vociferous way by which you talked about seeking an agency for women and writing it very bravely in that context. I'm not being patronizing, not in the doll's house in praise of Noura, something which was fascinating. And you also turned around, I would like to quote somebody else, words alone are a certain good for you too, like what Yeats had turned around and said. And much as you said you don't know which kind of a memoir to write, whether it has to be as a, I think you're a scholar of romanticism. Maybe you will go to Blake's Songs of Innocence as well as Songs of Experience, and you'll have two different versions for it. But what I found out, which was far more interesting than merely the Wordsworthian strain or the coming mask grows full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves, which you keep talking about, was this pre-Raphaelite mood, because you were absolutely very, very descriptive in your work, okay? And that statue of Victoria being there brings in the issue of colonization, whether advertently, inadvertently, subcutaneously, or subterraneously. It subsumes everybody in that sense of the term. Thank you very much for that very, very wonderful, exhilarating talk where the personal was the political. And it has been a proud privilege and an honor to share. I felt actually like an imposter sitting down and listening to great creative minds sitting and talking about it. Had I known that Professor Janet Wilson was there, I would have politely told somebody, Professor Nilufer or someone else, that when you have got people like that to chair a session, why is it that you bring in somebody so much different into the picture? But I would have definitely been there, not as the not as part of the chair maybe, but as part of a passive observer and a person who could possibly learn. To me, it was a very, very gratifying experience. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hand over the proceedings to the organizers. I don't know whether it is going back to Professor Nilufer Barucha or to Kirti Risgood.
Very briefly to me, and then to Kirti. But just in case there's anybody from the audience who would like to say anything on all the three talks at all, please feel free, because we have a little time, and then we can wind up this session. Yes, Sushila would like to say something.
Thank you very much, Professor Huck, for this very strong personal voice. It was so endearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And hi to Somdatta. Thank you.
Yeah, we have got some young people on board. Of course, we are all young, but these are really youngsters like Mushtaq, and I think our Sirsat was there. So if they are still there, if they would want to say something, we'd be very happy to hear their voices.
Yeah, may I come in?
Yes. Please, Mushtaq.
Good evening to everyone.
Can't see you.
Yeah, it's just some fault with my camera, so please come
Okay.
on. First of all, I want to congratulate the CoHaB IDC team for organizing such a wonderful session. In fact, on the email, I had congratulated ma'am for pulling up such a grand event and bringing up such experts, scholars, and writers. So it was a privilege and a great opportunity. So thanks to all three of you, and thank you to Nilufer ma'am for a wonderful session. It was delightful. Thank you.
I didn't ask you to just praise us. I thought maybe you wanted to say something about, I mean, because I know you've been there right from the beginning. So
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so if you wanted to.
No, for me, honestly, what's more exciting is to look with how much passion all the authors have brought in their voice and experience, and there's so much enthusiasm that they've sustained. And when they talked about their life as diasporics and as creative writers and poets, so that is a personal important key takeaway for me, who is an early stage academician in this field. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, and if our Sirsat would like to say something, we have got our friend Hector, the great traveler, our travel agent personified. Hector, are you still there? Would you like to come in? Hector has lived for a long time, diasporic in Canada for about 18 to 19 years, and then a returnee to India, and he's our travel agent. All the tickets that we book for all our flights hither and thither are done through Hector. Yes, Hector, please come in.
Well, thanks, Nilufer. Not, I lived only for 3 years
Oh,
in
okay.
Canada, so
Okay,
most
never
of
mind.
my life is
Never
in
mind.
India.
Never mind.
Yeah, the only question I have, I think any one of you can answer it, whoever the three speakers. First of all, my apologies. I joined in a little late as I was doing a webinar myself. But my only question is that, do you feel that with the kind of merging of identities of different cultures at all levels, you think that in maybe in 10 years time we will be seeing something totally different, in a sense that faceless cultures? Do you think that we are going to reach a time when there will be faceless cultures? There will be a society that is not governed by so much by the borders that we belong to. So how do you like? I'm sure one of you can answer this. Are we looking at something totally different 10 years from now? That's my question.
I think we are. I think we are. I think for several reasons. One is that it's now a very global culture. You know, when we migrated, for instance, it was just once in a couple of years that we were going to other
Yeah,
countries. You know, we have to settle down, get, that kind of thing, quite limited, the travel section. But
correct.
now, younger people, younger migrants are diasporics of not one culture, one country, but two, three, four, five sometimes.
Correct.
Amit Chaudhary, for instance, he goes from country to country and then comes back to India and then off he goes again. So all that diffuses, I think, the sense of border,
Right.
the requirement of border, or the fact that you have to fight the border, and you become more diffuse. The other thing is that when you're a third or fourth generation migrant or diasporic, the parents have the problem of adjusting to
Right.
different cultures, but the children who grow up in a different culture altogether, and as in any case hybrid with the parents being of two or three cultures, then that problem doesn't arise, does it? I mean, you're more at home with many cultures.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. But I think this homogeneity or some kind of pluralistic behavior will become something like a foregone conclusion.
Yeah,
People will
exactly.
not identify so much with nationalities as
Mm.
and I feel that it will be more governed by you see for example, capitalism, for example, the products that are produced. I think people will be identified more in that kind of this thing. And though we are all diehard people who love our countries, but I have a strong feeling that this kind of demerging process will begin sooner,
Yeah,
if not later.
yeah. We
And
begin with global citizens, I think,
yeah,
cosmopolitan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The
we
world
are
over.
already talking about redefining the diaspora, speaking about it in terms of transnationalism rather
Mm,
than the
mm.
classic diaspora. Kirti, one of our latest books, one copy has to go to Hector, okay?
Yes, yes.
Where people like Shobhita have written on Twitter, diaspora and the future of diaspora, and Sushila's work, and there are so many articles that Hector would find very interesting. So
No,
you
it's
should
interesting
send him one
because,
copy. You should
yeah,
send him one
yeah.
copy of the
Though
book.
I can identify with what Hector is saying also, because my own sister has now moved to Dublin, and now her daughter is an Irish citizen, but she is an Indian. Her husband is an Indian. So, and as you said, this easy moving between the countries by virtue of the fact that they are in a European country and they are able to move because of their permanent residency. It's amazing how she has already visited Switzerland in the last 4 years. She's already, and all these years when we were in India, we have not been out of the country at all. But the
Yeah.
moment she stepped into Dublin, she's been to Switzerland, she's been to Belgium, all the countries, around Rome, Italy. I mean, it's amazing how these borders are being diffused. And she actually, I mean, in some European countries, you can actually step over the borders and click your pictures. And, she sent all those photos. And it's unbelievable how easy it has been, or
And on the
seems,
passport you carry.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the stamps in the passport. And we have found out that, for instance, there are some, when we organize international conferences, that that we do not give, i.e. India doesn't give visas very easily to certain nationals from our own neighborhood for very obvious reasons, and also from other parts of the world. So it becomes very, very difficult, and we have had a conference at which to the last moment we didn't know whether our application for permission to uh, uh, give an invitation letter to those academics was going to work out or not. So, but if they had held other passports, then they wouldn't have had this problem, no matter what their ethnicity. Okay, so it's politics. It's the political. It's the power of the passport. Okay.
But you know, I think Nilufer, is that with all this, the people, the acceptance levels and tolerance levels will increase to a great level. And
Yeah.
you know, right now I'm teaching 4 Germans yoga on a Zoom session for 10 sessions. So
Yeah.
the point is that acceptability and all these things will
Yeah.
improve, you know, and I
It's
think great,
already changing.
and there'll be great respect for everybody else. So
Yeah.
these are the big positives that we can look forward to.
No. As an academic, as a teacher, you'll have acceptability and respect. We are talking about the acceptability and respect as far as the immigration officer at the counter at the airport is concerned. Uh, I have been asked every time I travel to Britain. I haven't done so after Janet's last summer institute in Northampton. But
Years ago.
yeah,
Years ago.
years ago, long back. Why are you here? I said, I've been invited. Why have they invited you? I said, excuse me, that's a question you should ask them, not me. They have invited me. Okay? Oh, okay. So,
But Nilufer, you know, when I meet
Interrogation.
immigration at different places, the first thing I say, I wish them and ask them always, how are you today? You know, so I'm very friendly. And then they don't ask me too many questions after that.
I'm not unfriendly. I'm not unfriendly. But if you ask me, why have they invited you? So,
Yeah.
excuse me, that's something you should ask
No,
them.
I know, but they are, you know, they kind of have a disarming attitude. They have a little stringent attitudes, but then once you disarm them a little bit, then they are a little bit more friendlier. That's what
I'm
I feel.
unfortunately not a very disarming person.
Thank you. Thanks, Nilufer.
Any other questions, any points anybody would like to raise? Sushila,
May I say something?
Yes, Sushila.
I think we are going to be very ambiguous people. We will move to, we will move forward, we will stay elsewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe culture will be diluted, but then we will also belong, we will carry our heritage. If not our baggage, but we will carry our heritage.
Yeah, Kevin said it was in England that he first he felt very strongly a New Zealander, which is what we all feel when we are outside.
Yeah, it is in Melbourne. I saw in Melbourne, it's beautiful. You do not have these, nationalities, or because they're intermarrying. They are, and the one thing they really celebrate is the cuisine of each culture and ethnicity. Food unites us. We love to eat the foods, and this is one thing which is celebratory, which is carnivalesque, which is Bakhtinian in a way, because you have a party, you all bring your own homeland dishes, and that sort of dissolves the boundaries and the prejudices. And in Melbourne, I love to be there for these things, because
food is a great unifier.
My family, they're marrying, like my grandson is an Aussie. He doesn't think he's not Bangladeshi. My daughters are now diasporic, settled there. They're citizens. They don't consider themselves Bangladeshi anymore. It is I who am, I have to come back. But my brother-in-law's daughter married an Australian. We couldn't go, so we did it on Zoom. So you see, there you don't have these divisions anymore.
True.
But I wouldn't say faceless culture. It has a new face, like Chandra said. it's a hybrid. It's a positive thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think maybe Kirti, unless somebody like Abhishek or somebody would like to say something. Feroz Nauroji seems to have disappeared off the screen. He's still here and he wants to speak. Anis, if you would like to contribute anything before Kirti offers a vote of thanks. Anis.
No, Nilufer, I don't have to because I joined late. We had some friends over the lunch. So I'm just halfway through and I could not be present. So this time I was just an observer and I enjoyed. Thank you, Kirti.
Oh, it's my pleasure, sir. Thank you for joining us.
And I think Feroz also
He's
joined.
not, no, he's not
Maybe
around.
he got cut off.
Maybe he got cut off, yeah.
Abhishek, we don't know who Abhishek is, if he's still around.
Yeah, he is around, so he
It's
could.
a new name for us. So welcome, Mr. Abhishek, and if you'd like to contribute something.
Okay, he's traveling, so. Okay.
Okay, so you won't have. Okay.
What I'd like to say, if I could just put in a little bit in there, yes, just one little point is that to indicate the broad spread of what we have been doing this afternoon in your time is that in my time now, it's just on 12:30. It's half an hour after midnight. And I think just as a reminder that this is actually a worldwide discussion. Things are changing. I hope they're for the better, but the interesting thing is that here you are sitting in Indian Standard Time in the middle. I know this doesn't apply to Chandani, but Chandani is actually better off than I am in New Zealand, where the day starts, bang, right at the opposite to Greenwich Mean Time, and for most of the year. And here we are at 12:30, in one part of us discussing with people who are still in the middle of the afternoon. I think that gives a fair indication of the scope of how we can all talk now, discuss things, and come together in ways that were unimaginable when I was a boy.
Or even 2 or 3 years
a
ago.
little bit, and yes.
That's good. That's a good one.
But it also explains why I'm on the blink. You may have noticed that I've been closing down gradually. I apologize.
Connected so much more.
10:30 p.m. in Melbourne.
Yes.
Yes.
What time is it in Melbourne?
10:30.
10:30. Oh, you're better off.
Better than Kevin.
Evening is young.
I am half an hour ahead of Nilufer.
Ahead of
5:30 or 5.
Yeah, we are 5 o'clock now.
And I'm 5:30, 30 minutes ahead.
And Sushila is, I think, what time is Sushila? I think she must be
in Mauritius.
In Mauritius, 2.5 hours behind us, maybe behind India.
Maybe 3:30, possibly 3:30.
Possibly. Okay, then Kirti, can we? So it was great. I think it was great talking and discussing and hearing from everyone. So, Kirti, please, the formal vote of thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kevin Ireland, for being up so late. Professor Wilson, thank you for being up so late and joining us and being throughout. Thank you. It was a wonderful session. Thank you, Dr. Chandanilokuge, for your talk. I enjoyed it. Professor Haq, we have been communicating on emails and Facebook now, so good to have finally met you virtually. Thank you all our participants who joined us from the beginning. Some of them had to leave because of their prior commitments, but they have apologized, but they made it in time to listen to you. And I would like to thank our computer center, University of Mumbai's computer center, for setting this all up. the system and starting everything on time, especially Rohit from our side. And yes, I mean, it was a wonderful session, and we look forward to many more such sessions. And as
Thanks to the university
authorities for giving us the permission in time to be able to conduct this seamlessly as well. So, thank you.
And to all our faithful audience who have been with us right from the very
Right,
first.
right from July, right from July.
July itself. Okay, so
Yeah.
thank you very much. From me as
Thank you, Nilufer. It's been lovely to see you.
Thank you, Nilufer.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for the event.